The flickering candles on the dinner table cast a soft glow across the polished wood, illuminating wine glasses and a silver tray of smoked salmon tartlets. It was supposed to be a celebration. My brother Julian had just announced his engagement to Alyssa Grayson, daughter of Senator Grayson from Connecticut. Everyone clapped when he showed her ring, a vintage sapphire set in white gold. My parents beamed like they had just won the lottery. I forced a smile, tried not to cough too hard, and waited for the right moment to speak. Halfway through the main course, when the laughter softened and people were topping off their drinks, I cleared my throat. I had rehearsed this sentence 100 times. I've been diagnosed with cancer. The room stilled the clinking of cutlery pausing mid-air. Julian blinked, his fiancée's smile faltered. My father reached for his glass. What kind? Celia, my mother, asked, lips tight. Adenoid cystic carcinoma. Rare. Aggressive. My oncologist says we need to begin treatment immediately. My voice was steady, though inside I was trembling. There's a therapy available. It's not covered by insurance. It costs $180,000. Silence stretched across the table like a growing crack in ice. My mother inhaled sharply. Celia, darling, you couldn't have waited. Julian just got engaged. My father chimed in. We want to enjoy this evening. Let's not make it about illness. Illness? Like I had a cold. I looked at Julian, hoping for some flicker of concern. He reached for Alyssa's hand. Always dramatic, sis. Maybe you should wait for the second opinion. The first one was pretty clear, I said, and the longer we wait, the worse it gets. My chest hurt from holding in too much. I hated bringing this up tonight, but I thought family would want to know. You knew about the trust Grandpa left for medical emergencies. That trust could save my life. My father's face stiffened. It's meant for the whole family, Celia. Emergencies of all kinds. Julian is getting married. This is an important step for our family. I stared at him. Are you saying a wedding is more urgent than my treatment? He didn't answer directly. Alyssa gently placed her napkin on the table. There's so much innovation in natural medicine these days. My mother nodded. We can look into other options. Less costly ones. There's got to be a way without draining the trust entirely. The therapy has a 70% chance of success. Standard treatment is 15%. I don't have time to wait. It's not just numbers. This is my life. Julian leaned forward. Come on. 70% is not a guarantee. Maybe the standard one will work just fine. I know someone who beat cancer with green tea and yoga. My knuckles turned white against my water glass. Are you listening to yourselves? I have a timeline. My doctor said 6 months if I do nothing. I'm not asking for a vacation in France. I'm asking to stay alive. I looked at my father. His fingers were curled around the stem of his wine glass, eyes distant. We'll discuss this later, he said. Tonight is not the time. I pushed my chair back, heart racing. Then, when is the time, Dad? When I'm in hospice, when I'm ashes in an urn while you toast Julian's wedding. Mary Ann's voice cut in firm and final. That's enough, Celia. We are celebrating. Don't ruin this for your brother. I felt like I was falling, like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. I stood there a moment watching their faces. None of them looked at me directly. I swallowed the bitter taste rising in my throat and whispered, Congratulations, Julian. I hope the wedding is everything you dreamed of. I walked out the front door alone into the cold Portland night. Behind me, laughter resumed slowly like a record picking up from where it had skipped. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands shaking. My phone buzzed with a message from Julian. Sorry you felt left out tonight. Let's catch up sometime. No mention of my diagnosis, no offer of help, just a generic line. I deleted the message, drove home in silence. The apartment was dark, the heating patchy. I curled up in bed that night, wondering what kind of family hears you say I'm dying and responds with, We'll talk later. I had always been the one who stayed, who took care of Mom when she slipped into early dementia, who canceled work trips to drive Julian to interviews, who paid for his first photography course when he got inspired by one of my exhibits. And now that I was the one in need, they turned their faces away. It was the beginning of a kind of death I hadn't expected. Not the cancer, but the end of the illusion that I mattered to them as more than a background character in Julian's success story. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise and whispered to no one, "I'll find a way. With or without you." The next morning, I woke up with dry eyes and a heaviness in my chest that didn't come from the cancer. It was the weight of knowing I was alone. But I didn't have the luxury of self-pity. I opened my laptop and began researching everything again. Treatment options clinics costs. The numbers hadn't changed. The experimental therapy with the best odds was still nearly $180,000. My insurance wouldn't touch it. The hospital needed confirmation of payment within 3 weeks to hold my spot. I emailed the administrator of the family trust requesting a meeting. A week passed, no reply. On the 7th day, I got a generic letter forwarded from my father's office stating that the trust funds were already allocated to pre-approved family commitments. Commitments. I stared at that word for a long time. Then I checked the trust account online. My access was limited since I wasn't a trustee, but the balance was visible. 0. Completely withdrawn. I called the bank. After some security questions, the manager confirmed the entire sum had been liquidated the previous week. I asked where it went. She hesitated, then said it appeared the funds were transferred to accounts belonging to various international vendors and a luxury event firm based in Paris. My stomach turned. I hung up and drove straight to my parents' house. The moment I stepped inside, the scent of fresh lilies hit me. Arrangements sat in the hallway, samples for the wedding. In the kitchen, Marianne was flipping through a binder of floral options. Dad was on the phone. Julian's voice echoed from the backyard. I didn't wait. "You spent the trust," I said, barely holding back. "You used it all." Mom looked up, blinking. "Celia, we didn't think you'd come today," I repeated louder. "You used the emergency medical fund." Dad walked in. His tone was clipped. "We had to make decisions for the family. This wedding is strategic. Senator Grayson's daughter, press coverage, political exposure. Julian's future depends on this going perfectly." I was shaking. "So you used my survival fund to buy a French chateau." Julian stepped inside, sunglasses still on. His arms were crossed. "It's not your money, Celia. It's the family's. I am the family. I have cancer. I am dying." "You don't know that," he shot back. "People beat cancer all the time. You're being dramatic. You always make things about you." My mouth went dry. I was too stunned to speak. Alyssa came down the stairs just then holding a clipboard. She glanced at me, hesitated. Julian, the caterer, called again. "The dessert tasting is rescheduled." Then she noticed my face. "Everything okay?" Julian waved her off. "Just Celia being Celia." My mother stepped in. "Honey, we can still help. There are holistic approaches. And support groups. People raise funds online. You're creative. Make a video or something. A video about dying to strangers. Because my own parents and brother decided I wasn't worth investing in." I turned to the door, heart thudding. They were already moving on. Dad picked up his phone again. Julian checked his watch. No one stopped me. On the way out, I saw a note on the fridge with a countdown, 10 days until Paris. I went home, opened my laptop, and started building a fundraising page. I titled it Fighting Alone. I uploaded a photo of me in the hospital gown, captioned it with the diagnosis, and laid everything out honestly, painfully. I didn't mention my family. I didn't have to. The story was clear enough. In the first 3 days, I raised $1,500, not even 1% of what I needed. But then, something strange happened. Former clients from photography sessions shared the link. A nurse I once interviewed donated and left a comment. "You helped me tell my story. Time to help you survive yours." A stranger messaged me and asked for my Venmo. My old professor from college pledged $1,000 and wrote, "Celia, you always fought for others. Let us fight for you." In a week, it grew to $9,300. I sold my camera gear, laptop, even my childhood piano. I was too sick to work full-time, but I took freelance writing jobs between chemo sessions. My body was breaking down, but my will hardened. I did the math every night. What could I sell tomorrow? What favor could I ask without shame? Every dollar was a chance at life. Meanwhile, Julian and Alyssa's wedding updates exploded across social media. Engagement photos in Tuscany, designer fittings, tasting menus. It's going to be the wedding of the decade one Post read. I stared at a photo of Marianne laughing beside Alyssa during a fitting, the same mother who had told me to start a GoFundMe. She was holding a clutch that probably cost more than a week of treatment. And still, they hadn't donated a cent, nor even shared my campaign. They posted their wedding gift registry instead, a $700 toaster, a $4,000 espresso machine. I felt like vomiting, maybe from the chemo, maybe from rage. One night, as I laid on my side after another brutal treatment, I saw a message notification. It was from an old acquaintance, now a filmmaker. I saw your campaign. I'm working on a documentary series about healthcare and families. Your story hit me hard. Can we talk? I hesitated. She followed up. Even if it's just audio, even if you don't survive, your story deserves light. I said yes. She came with her small crew, filmed discreetly over a few weeks. They never pushed. Just listened. Captured me at my weakest and still respected every boundary. I didn't know what would come of it, but it felt like something mattered again. One morning, I woke up after a restless sleep and saw my fundraising page had passed 12,000. Someone had shared it on a podcast. Strangers commented, "Keep fighting, don't give up, you matter." I clung to those words because my own family had never said them. The days blurred into each other as the treatment continued. My hair began to fall in uneven clumps, and my skin turned pale with bruises blooming across my arms like ink stains. I stopped looking in the mirror. My strength faded, but the resolve stayed. I took slow walks around the block just to prove I could. I cleaned the apartment when I had energy. I set alarms to drink water, to eat something, anything. On a gray Tuesday afternoon after my 5th round of chemo, Dr. Harris sat me down with a cautious smile. She pulled up my latest scan. The tumors are smaller, much smaller. It's not remission, but it's working. I blinked, unsure how to respond. What does this mean? It means we keep going. It means there's hope. I left the hospital that day walking slower, but standing straighter. I was still alive. I was beating the odds. That night, I lit a candle and stared at the calendar. Julian's wedding was 10 days away. A thick ivory envelope had arrived a week ago with gold lettering and a wax seal. It was ridiculous. Inside was an invitation written in French and English with matching RSVP card. I had nearly thrown it away, but something made me keep it. A reminder, maybe. A receipt of betrayal. I wasn't planning to attend. I had no dress, no money, no reason. But then I saw another post on Alyssa's page, a video from the wedding planner walking through the chateau garden with drone footage overhead. In the caption she wrote, "A celebration of love, family, and priorities." That last word hit me like a slap. Priorities. A comment under it from Marianne said, "So proud of Julian. This wedding is a legacy." My stomach twisted. I clicked out of the app and turned off the screen. That night I lay in bed unable to sleep. Then I remembered the filmmaker. I picked up the phone and texted her. "I'm thinking of attending the wedding. Would that be something you'd want to cover?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Yes, but only if you're ready. We can be discreet. Hidden cameras, wireless mic. It'll just look like wedding footage. You deserve to be seen." I stared at the screen. My heart was racing. I typed back, "Let's do it." 2 days later, we met at a quiet cafe. She brought her assistant and mapped out a plan. We'd travel separately. Her team would be posing as videographers from the wedding staff, easy to blend in. They'd wire me with a tiny mic and set up remote cameras to capture reactions. No ambushes, no violence, just truth. That's all I wanted now. Truth in a room full of fiction. I bought a simple but elegant coral dress online, the only one that didn't make me look like a ghost. I found a wig that resembled my old hair, a dark brown with soft curls. I practiced walking in low heels again. My strength was fragile, but the anger kept me upright. When we landed in France, the chateau looked exactly like the photos. Lush gardens, marble staircases, fountains that glowed under string lights. My life savings and hope had been funneled into this place without my consent. The irony burned. I stayed at a small inn nearby. On the day of the wedding, the team wired me with care. They told me I didn't have to speak if I didn't want to. Just being present would say enough. I smiled tightly. I'll speak. Don't worry. As the sun dipped low, the guests began to arrive. Limousines lined the gravel driveway. Waiters passed out champagne. The smell of imported orchids filled the air. I waited until the cocktail hour just before the reception. Then I walked through the side path toward the garden entrance. No one noticed at first. Then a server turned and paused. A few heads followed. Then, all at once, the crowd parted like a wave. My mother saw me first. Her face drained of color. Her jaw opened slightly. "Celia," she whispered. I smiled gently. "Not a ghost, Mom. Just your daughter. Alive." The silence that followed was so complete it roared in my ears. Guests whispered. Some looked confused. Others looked down. My father stepped forward. "You look good." "All things considered," I said calmly, "since I was supposed to be dead by now." He cleared his throat. "This is not the time. It's your brother's day." "Of course," I said. "How much did this day cost again?" He tensed. "That's not your concern." I nodded slowly. No, I guess my life wasn't either. Julian appeared, Alyssa clinging to his arm in a lace gown that could fund a hospital wing. "Celia, you came," he said with fake warmth. "I made it in more ways than one. Beautiful venue, worth every penny of someone else's life." Alyssa's smile cracked. I saw the tremble in her fingers. The documentary crew captured every second from a distance, lenses focused and silent. When the wedding photographer called for family photos, I stepped forward. "Don't mind me," I said. "I'm still part of this family, right?" We lined up on the grand staircase. The photographer snapped shots while I stood center, surrounded by relatives who refused to meet my eyes. The champagne glasses sparkled. The lights twinkled. I whispered under my breath to the lens, "This is what betrayal looks like in formal wear." During dinner, when the microphone passed around for toasts, I rose slowly. My knees were shaking. I walked to the front and took the mic. The room hushed. Cameras turned. I raised a glass of water. "To Julian and Alyssa, may your marriage be as strong as my will to live." Nervous laughter. I continued. "6 months ago, I was given 6 to 8 months to live. The only treatment with real hope cost almost the same as this celebration. But priorities had to be set." The room stiffened. My parents froze. I kept going. I'm alive today not because of family support, but in spite of it. I survived thanks to strangers' friends and a 15% chance that somehow worked. I hope your odds are better. I set the microphone down and walked away, leaving silence in my wake. I didn't look back as I walked through the grand reception hall toward the courtyard. My dress clung to my shoulders, my chest rising and falling with the breath I didn't know I was holding. Behind me, no one followed, not a single family member. Outside, the breeze from the surrounding hills was cool against my skin. I sat on a stone bench in the shadows while the lights flickered overhead. One of the videographers found me a few minutes later and gently handed me a cup of warm tea. "You were extraordinary," she whispered. "We got everything, every glance, every word." "Thank you," I said softly. That's all I needed. That night, I returned to my inn and collapsed into bed, my body aching from the effort my emotions frayed. But my heart felt still for the first time in months. 2 weeks later, back in Portland, the filmmaker sent me the first cut of the documentary. She titled it Wedding or Life. It opened with soft shots of the chateau, music, laughter, then faded to hospital footage of me with my IV. The contrast was jarring, painful, powerful. She included my toast near the end, captured the raw silence. The camera lingered on my mother's frozen face, Julian's pale knuckles gripping his champagne flute. The crew had done their job, and the world was about to see it. When the documentary launched online, it exploded within 48 hours. Bloggers picked it up. A medical ethics journal reviewed it. The title alone sparked a hashtag. Hashtag wedding or life. People debated, raged, wept. Viewers sent me thousands of messages, from cancer survivors, from parents, from strangers who had been discarded by family. I read them in tears. One message simply read, "You gave me permission to walk away." The backlash for my family was immediate. The Graysons pulled political support from Julian after learning how the funds were spent. Alyssa's father released a statement distancing himself from the private matter, and Alyssa herself deleted her social media after commenters flooded her last post with "Enjoy the blood orchids." Mary Ann resigned from 2 nonprofit boards amid quiet pressure. One press leak suggested she had been asked to step down due to the optics. Roberts' law firm quietly severed ties, citing irreconcilable reputational conflict. Julian's startup deal fell through. The investors ghosted him, unwilling to be linked to the scandal. His wedding photos were dissected in think pieces. Captioned under stills of smiling champagne toasts were quotes from my toast from my mic'd conversations. The contrast between beauty and betrayal was too stark to ignore. Then came the lawsuit. My parents tried to block further distribution of the documentary, claiming privacy violation. But the footage was legal. Public event. My consent. My words. The courts threw it out. Their lawyer withdrew after internal leaks showed their initial justification for using the trust had been networking value. Those words alone were plastered across headlines. Networking over life. The documentary hit a streaming platform 2 months later. Viewership tripled. A news outlet ran a special on medical crowdfunding and family abandonment. They interviewed me on air. I spoke slowly but clearly. I didn't trash them. I didn't need to. I simply told the truth. The truth had already done the damage. Donations flooded in again. My GoFundMe Long Quiet saw a second wave. Supporters from around the world gave. With the combined revenue from the documentary, the interviews, and the donations, I was able to secure long-term treatment, maintenance therapies, nutrition specialists, and most of all, I was no longer surviving. I was building something. I began speaking at hospitals, universities, medical conferences. I gave lectures on patient advocacy, on how systems fail when families do. I stood before rooms of white coats and asked, when your patient says she has support, do you ask what that really means? Do you ask who's holding her hand at night? I carried one photo to every talk. It was a framed shot from the wedding, the one taken on the stone stairs with the sunset behind us. Julie and Alyssa, my parents and me in the center, calm-faced in coral. I would hold up that photo and ask which one of these people chose the party over the person, which one walked away with a gift bag, and which one walked away fighting to breathe. Every room went quiet. After one keynote at a healthcare summit, a young doctor approached me with tears in her eyes. My mother left me when I got sick. I never thought I'd hear someone say it out loud. You did. Thank you. I nodded. I understood. People don't talk about the second grief, the grief of being abandoned while alive. One afternoon, nearly 8 months after the wedding, I received a letter in the mail. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Julian. It was brief. He wrote about how Alyssa had left him, about how he was living alone now in a small, one-bedroom apartment, about how he watched the documentary and saw himself clearly for the first time. I lost everything he wrote, and I think I deserved to. I'm sorry. I read it twice. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and went to my closet. I pulled out the wedding photo, the one from the beach. I flipped it over, wrote one sentence on the back with a steady hand. Beautiful wedding, worth every penny of someone else's life. Then I mailed it to him in a plain envelope. No return address, just a single stamp and the truth. I don't know if he'll frame it, but I hope he stares at it every day, because eventually the cost of betrayal comes due, and this time I was still here to collect. Weeks passed quietly after I sent the photo. I didn't expect a reply, and none came. But I didn't need one. Some truths aren't meant to be answered, only acknowledged. I shifted my focus to healing physically and emotionally. I began writing again, not for publication, but for myself. Pages and pages filled with thoughts I had silenced during the hardest months, things I couldn't say out loud when my body was breaking, and the people I loved had vanished. My journal became my witness, my quiet confessional. On one page, I wrote, "Survival isn't just about cells responding to medicine. It's about finding a reason to keep breathing when everyone you trusted chooses not to see you." That sentence stayed with me. I began to share it during speaking events, and to my surprise, others started quoting it too. I began receiving invitations from support groups, cancer retreats, educational forums. They didn't want statistics. They wanted stories, and mine, uncomfortable, imperfect, and raw, seemed to matter. I started receiving emails from people across the country. One woman told me her family drained her savings while she was unconscious after surgery. Another man wrote about his parents skipping his kidney transplant to attend his brother's promotion ceremony. I realized then that what had happened to me wasn't isolated. It wasn't rare. It was just invisible, hidden under layers of family pride, social masks, and polite betrayal. By naming it, by showing it, I had ripped the veil. That thought gave me more strength than any IV ever could. Then came the invitation that would close the circle. A major medical university asked me to be the keynote speaker at a symposium about healthcare inequality. I was stunned. Me, a freelance photographer who couldn't even afford her own treatment a year ago now, headlining an academic event. I accepted without hesitation. The evening of the event, I stood backstage in a navy dress that had been gifted by a designer who'd seen the documentary. My hair was still growing back in patches, my voice was a little softer, but I felt more whole than I had in years. When my name was called, I stepped into the spotlight to the sound of applause. I opened with a story. Not mine at first. I told them about a girl who once stayed up nights helping her brother study, who sold her own camera to keep the lights on, who whispered encouragement when everyone else mocked his failures. Then I paused. That girl was me. That brother was Julian. And when I got sick, he bought a custom champagne tower while I rationed my meds. The room held its breath. I told them about the trust fund, about the chateau, about the mic, about the speech. And then I pulled out the framed photo again, the same one I'd carried from hospital rooms to conferences. I held it up. This, I said, is what betrayal looks like. It's elegant. It's smiling. It's paid for in full. But what it doesn't show is who took the photo. Who was erased before they ever arrived? Who lived not because of what's in the frame, but in spite of it? I set it down. I finished my talk by looking out at the crowd and saying, if you take away one thing tonight, let it be this: when a patient says, my family supports me. Don't stop there. Ask what that support looks like. Ask who shows up. Ask who pays. Because for some of us, the silence of those closest becomes the loudest sound we carry. I stepped away from the podium to a standing ovation. People shook my hand, hugged me, whispered thank yous. I left the building that night feeling like I had finally stepped out from under the shadow of a wedding that once threatened to bury me. Later that month, I sat alone on my small balcony wrapped in a sweater watching the autumn wind scatter leaves across the street. I had an email open on my laptop from a well-known publisher. They wanted to turn my story into a memoir. Not a sensational one they promised, an honest one, a voice for those left behind by the very people who should have held them closest. I agreed. The manuscript would take months, maybe longer. But for once, time wasn't something I feared. I was no longer counting down from 6 months. I was counting forward, toward possibility, toward chapters unwritten. One night around midnight, a new message popped up. No subject line. Just 2 words in the body. I'm sorry. It was from Julian. I stared at it for a long time, then closed the laptop without replying. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. I had given myself the closure they never offered. My story wasn't theirs to finish. It was mine. I glanced at the wall beside me where the wedding photo still hung, not for vengeance, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is survive loudly. And I had. Winter came softly that year, the kind that blanketed the city in a hush rather than a storm. I kept my schedule light, focusing on rest and writing. The publisher had sent back notes for the first draft, and as I reread my own words, I felt the weight of everything that had happened settle in a different way. Not as pain, but as evidence that I had walked through fire and kept walking. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and forget for a moment that I'd survived. My body still ached in places the doctors warned would never fully heal. My skin bore traces of what it had endured, but my breath came steady. My hands didn't shake anymore when I touched the keys of my laptop, and I no longer felt the desperate ache for my family's validation. They had chosen their moment. I had chosen my future. The documentary continued to spark discussions long after its peak. It was now being shown in college ethics courses, patient advocacy workshops, even church groups. Messages still came smaller in number but deeper in sentiment. I watched quietly as Julian faded from the public eye. Alyssa never reappeared. Marianne and Robert closed their social accounts and moved out of the city, retreating into silence. But one day, I received a small box by mail. No return address. Inside was a photo album, handmade. The kind with fabric corners and handwritten labels. Every page was filled with pictures of Julian and me as kids. At the bottom of the last page, a sticky note in my brother's handwriting simply read, "I should have remembered this version of us." I closed the album, set it gently on my shelf, and didn't reach for it again. Some doors were meant to remain half closed. I began to think more about legacy, not the kind built in chateaus and designer gowns, but the one that lives in the stories people pass on. One morning, I visited a local cancer support group unannounced. I sat in the back, listened to a woman speak about the loneliness of treatment, the fear of being forgotten. When she finished, I raised my hand and said softly, "I know what it feels like to be betrayed by the people you thought would carry you. I know what it's like to hear the word cancer and realize it echoes louder in your own home than in any hospital." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded. After the meeting, others came up. One asked if I was the woman from the film. Another hugged me so tightly I nearly cried. That night, I wrote in my journal, maybe my survival wasn't just for me. Maybe it was so I could light a path for someone else crawling in the dark. As the months passed, the noise faded. The controversy cooled. The wedding became a cautionary tale in some circles, a forgotten scandal in others. But for me, it was a beginning, not an ending. A cruel beginning, perhaps, but one that forced me into a version of myself I never would have become otherwise. Stronger, clearer, unapologetically alive. I moved apartments in early spring. A bigger space, more sunlight. I brought little from the old place. Just a few books, the wedding photo, the journal, and one framed print of a sunset I had taken years ago on a mountain in Utah. I hung it above my desk, where I now spent most of my days drafting my book planning talks, connecting with others who had found courage through my story. Every once in a while, I'd receive another envelope from Julian. Small notes, quiet attempts. I never responded. Not out of cruelty, but peace. He was walking his path. I was walking mine. They didn't have to meet again. One evening, I received a call from Dr. Harris. She sounded hopeful. "Your numbers look stable. Better than stable." She paused. "I think you're going to get more years than we ever expected." I hung up and walked to my window. Outside, the cherry blossoms had started blooming again. Delicate, bold, beautiful. Just like survival. I smiled to myself and whispered aloud, for no one but me, I am still here. Still standing, and finally free. Spring melted into summer, and the days grew longer, brighter, not just outside, but inside me too. I had learned to live in moments again, not fear them. I went back to photography not professionally, but for joy. I walked with my camera through quiet parks and along the riverbank, capturing the simple things I used to ignore. Light on water, children laughing, old women holding hands. I framed them with care, as if collecting proof that life was still beautiful. The memoir came together slowly but steadily. Every chapter, a piece of the wound made whole through words. I decided to call it 15% in honor of the odds that once felt like a death sentence, but had become the root of my rebirth. The publisher loved it. They asked if I wanted a co-writer. I said no. This had to come from me. Every sentence, every pause, every scar. One day, while proofreading the final chapter, I received an email from the filmmaker. The documentary had been nominated for an award, a big one. There would be a ceremony in New York. She wanted me to attend as her guest. I hesitated at first. It felt strange to celebrate something born from such pain. But then I thought about the people who'd watched it and written to me, the ones who saw themselves in my story and felt less alone. So I packed my bag, bought a simple dress, and flew to New York. The theater was grand, the lights soft. When our category was announced and our title was called, I felt time pause. We walked onto the stage. The applause was warm, steady, real. The filmmaker gave a short speech, then handed me the mic. I wasn't expecting it, but I didn't panic. I just took a breath and said thank you for seeing value in truth. This story wasn't supposed to be told. It was supposed to stay hidden like so many others. But we pulled it into the light, not to punish, but to protect others from silence. I didn't survive because of a miracle. I survived because strangers chose to care when my family didn't. And because I chose to keep going when it would have been easier to disappear. The room stood with me. I saw tears. I saw hope. That night, I walked through Manhattan with a sense of closure I never thought I'd earn. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace, pure and quiet. When I returned home, the memoir launched within weeks. It sold well, more than I imagined, but the greatest reward came in an envelope one morning. A letter from a young woman in Arizona who had just been diagnosed with the same cancer. She wrote, "I was ready to give up. Then I found your story. I watched your film. I read your book. I believe now. I'm going to fight." I sat with her letter in my lap and cried. Not for myself, but for the girl I used to be, the one begging for someone to choose her. Now I had become that someone for others. That was more than enough. The seasons turned again. I marked my second year since diagnosis with a quiet dinner alone, a candle lit beside my plate. No party, no speeches. No, just a whispered promise I will keep going. I started volunteering at a local hospice offering photography sessions for families in their final moments. I captured wrinkled hands held tight, whispered goodbyes, silent prayers. My photos were often the last memories people had of each other, and it felt sacred, healing even. Sometimes I'd see a mother hugging her daughter too tightly and wonder what it might have been like if mine had done the same. But I didn't dwell. I had no more room for anger, only space for grace. Years from now, people may forget the wedding, the scandal, the betrayal. But somewhere in hospital rooms and college classrooms, someone might remember my face, my voice, my words. And maybe they'll choose differently. Maybe they'll stay when someone says I need you. Maybe they'll protect the one who whispers I'm afraid. If that happens even once, then all of it was worth it. I am still not cured. There are scans every few months, pills every morning, the ache of fatigue some days. But I am alive, fully, undeniably. And that is the greatest twist of all. They spent everything planning for a future without me. But here I am, still breathing, still writing, still here. It was early autumn when I finally returned to the park bench where I once sat the week after I'd learned about the trust fund being emptied. I remembered how hollow I had felt that day, the sense of being erased before death had even come. Now I sat in the same spot with a wool coat wrapped around me, a warm drink in hand, and a subtle smile curving my lips. The leaves were gold and crimson around my feet, and the sky was cloudless. A little girl ran past me chasing a paper airplane. Her laughter echoed across the grass, and I realized in that moment that life had become quieter, but not smaller. It had deepened. The pain had stopped screaming, though it still lived somewhere under the skin, like an old burn that tingled before rain. A few days later, I received a message from a local gallery. They wanted to feature a series of my photographs, the ones I had taken during treatment, and after images of shadows across hospital walls of my bald reflection in a rain-soaked window of the sunrise through IV drips. They asked me to name the collection. I called it Proof of Life. Opening night was small, intimate, filled with artists, cancer survivors, nurses, students. As I stood quietly beside one of the photographs, a woman touched my elbow. She looked to be in her 60s, her hair streaked with silver. She said I came tonight because my daughter's in treatment. She feels forgotten. She watched your documentary last week. It gave her something to hold on to. I swallowed the knot in my throat and simply said, "Tell her she's not forgotten. Not even close." A week later, I stood at my mailbox flipping through letters when I noticed one from an unknown sender. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short note in familiar handwriting. Julian again. This one was different. There were no excuses, no attempts to explain. Just a paragraph. It read, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I've spent the past year trying to be someone my sister wouldn't turn away from. I volunteer at a free clinic now. I know it's not enough, but I'm trying. And thank you for sending that photo. I see it every day. It reminds me that someone's life was the cost of my ignorance. I held the letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt the slow thaw of something I thought had died. Not trust, but recognition. Maybe Julian had started to see the world beyond his reflection. Maybe. That night, I wrote him a note. Just one line. Keep going. I didn't include a return address. I didn't sign it. But I sent it. Not because I owed him anything, but because healing, real healing, sometimes meant letting go of needing the last word. Months passed, then a year. My health remained steady, my scans unchanged. I traveled more, spoke more, lived more. My name appeared in more articles and book clubs. The royalties from my memoir covered all my treatments and more. I established a small scholarship for students who'd been abandoned by their families during medical crises. It wasn't much, but it was something, a quiet rebellion against generational silence. One afternoon, a producer called to ask if I'd consider turning the book into a scripted series. I laughed, then said we'd talk. I never imagined the girl who'd sat in a clinic alone with a 15% chance would someday be negotiating rights to her own survival story. But life has a funny way of rewarding those who refuse to stay invisible. One evening, while sorting old boxes, I came across a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was Julian and me as kids standing in a treehouse we built one summer. We were covered in dirt, smiling, holding up a sign that said, "No grown-ups allowed." I stared at it for a long time. Then I tucked it into a drawer. Not to forget, but to remember that there was once a time before the hurt. A time before the cost. That memory didn't erase what followed, but it reminded me that every story has chapters. Some are joyful, some are brutal, but none of them have to be the ending. My story didn't end in a hospital bed. It didn't end at the chateau. It didn't end when they said no. It began with survival. It bloomed with truth. And it continues with choice. Every single day. I choose to stay. I choose to write. I choose to remember. But most of all, I choose to live. The anniversary of the wedding arrived like an unwelcome memory, not because I had forgotten, but because it no longer held the power to wound. I didn't mark the date with bitterness. I spent the day in a garden outside the cancer center where I once walked in trembling, where I now spoke twice a month to new patients entering the maze of diagnosis. I sat beneath a fig tree and watched a nurse lead a woman in a scarf to the bench across from me. She looked tired, scared. I caught her eye and smiled gently. She smiled back. Sometimes that's all it takes to make someone feel a little less alone. I had come to learn that survival isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence of staying open after being closed for too long. I still saw Dr. Harris every quarter. Each scan felt like turning a page, not knowing what the next sentence would be. But so far, each one had come back stable, still here, still holding, still choosing to stay. My book was translated into several languages. I received a copy in Japanese, another in Portuguese. I held them like fragile treasure, realizing that my voice now lived in places I had never set foot. That thought made me smile because my silence once nearly killed me, and now my words crossed oceans. One evening, I was invited to speak at a high school graduation. The principal had seen my TED Talk and said these students need to hear from someone who fought for her own worth. I stood in front of 400 teenagers and told them I hope none of you ever have to experience what I did, but if you do, I want you to know that you can survive even without the people you thought you couldn't live without, that the people who walk away are not your definition. You are. The students stood clapped. Some cried. Afterward, one girl approached me with trembling hands and whispered, "I think I needed to hear that more than anything in the world." I gave her my number. I told her to call me if she ever felt unseen. The summer passed, and I visited Paris not to chase ghosts, but to rewrite memories. I didn't go to the chateau. I walked along the Seine, ate warm bread in small cafes, took photos of strangers laughing. I stood in front of Notre Dame, hand resting over my chest, and whispered thank you to no one and everyone. Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you for not letting me go when I nearly did. And thank you for the fire because it turned me into someone I now loved. When I returned home, I framed one of the Paris photos for my wall. A woman with silver hair feeding pigeons beside a child blowing bubbles. Life and age in the same frame. Hope. My apartment grew cozier with time. New shelves, more books. A couch gifted by a friend. Plants that somehow stayed alive even when I forgot to water them. A bit like me. Julian wrote one final time. A longer letter. He spoke about volunteering, about meeting someone new, someone kind, about how he still wakes up sometimes feeling shame like a weight on his chest. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said, I know I lost my sister the day I chose comfort over courage. I'm not asking for another chance. I just wanted you to know I finally see you not as the problem, not as the disruption, but as the one who was right all along. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the old treehouse photo. No reply. No closure needed. Just history placed in its rightful place. In autumn again, I spoke at a policy forum about family health rights. I ended my speech by saying we talk about medical care as a system, but we forget that the first line of care is often family. And when that line fails, we need to be ready to catch those who fall. I received a standing ovation. As I stepped down, a woman in a blazer grabbed my hand and said, Your story changed the way I look at my patients. You changed something in me. I smiled and said, Good. That means we're finally getting somewhere. I walked into the cool air and felt peace bloom in my lungs. I had made it through cancer. Through abandonment, through grief, not untouched, but undestroyed. My story wasn't just a warning. It had become a bridge, a place where others could stand and know they weren't alone. That mattered more than vengeance ever could. It was life, hard won, beautiful, and entirely mine.